Today, as we begin our Bible study here from Salado United Methodist Church, for those of you that are watching, remote from Salado, it is a little town of about 2,500 people that's located halfway between Waco and Austin. And so we do Bible studies here 2 times a week, and our texts are based on the Revised Common Lectionary. I believe if you would look on our website, you can find that on there somewhere. And today, our lessons that we're going to cover are two. One of them is from Isaiah 61, various verses in that chapter, and then we will look at Psalm 126 in a very cursory and brief way. As we begin our lesson from Isaiah 61, this is part of what is called Trito Isaiah. Last week anyway, we talked about Isaiah being divided into 3 parts. This is the last part, and this part, some think, was written from Israel's exile. What it has to do with is, first of all, the good news of God's deliverance. And so this idea of good news, which, as I mentioned the last time we were together, Mark picks up and utilizes this word in a way that had never been used before, which is gospel, evangelism. So, this text begins at 61, sounding a lot like the 4 so-called servant songs that we see in Isaiah 40 through 55. The servant songs are songs or texts or prophecies that describe the Son of Man or the Messiah that is to come. And this is not one of the servant psalms, but it sounds like at the beginning that it certainly could have been one of them. The servant songs, some people think, are written by a lone voice crying in the wilderness, so to speak. Some people think it's the prophet himself that is speaking of himself without self-reference. Other people think it is a voice that represents the whole community of Judah. And no one really knows for sure, so I will leave that question hanging, and you can sort of ponder that if you'd like. It begins by saying, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me." Okay, that sounds servant-like, songish. "Because the Lord has anointed me, the Lord has chosen me, the Lord has made me sacred and set apart to do this job." That's what that means. "He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed." That is to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and release to the prisoners. Now, all those things are blessings that God will give to the people of Israel. They're oppressed because they're in exile. They're brokenhearted because they have been ripped from their native country of Palestine by the Babylonians. Now, of course, Cyrus has come to release them, but at this point it says release to the prisoners. Those in exile, of course, are prisoners. And then the next thing it says is to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And what that means is something like Sabbath year or Jubilee year. Now, Americans are loath to think about these ideas. On the Jubilee year, which is every Sabbath of Sabbaths. So the year after 49 years, which would be the 50th year, that's the Jubilee year, all debts are canceled. All prisoners are released, slaves, in other words. Also, all the land tends to revert back to its original owners. And so that's the Jubilee year, or the year of the Lord's favor. Then it says, the day of the vengeance of our God, to comfort those who mourn. So what this means is good news, bad news. For the enemies of the people of God, they will receive God and God's vengeance. For those who need comfort and are in mourning, they will receive grace. So, to provide for those who mourn in Zion, which is a representative of Jerusalem, or the place where God resides with the people, to give them a garland instead of ashes. That is, they will receive flowers instead of ashes, and ashes, of course, represents anything that has been destroyed, down to basically its very elemental parts. The oil of gladness instead of mourning. People would anoint themselves with oil when they were in mourning for the death of a loved one, or when they are celebrating something like the birth of a child. They will be called oaks of righteousness and planting of the Lord, to display his glory. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. These may be references to the ruined cities, and even perhaps the temple. They shall repair the ruined cities and devastations of many generations. So in other words, all of the grief that has come to Israel over the years, this Isaiah prophesies is good news, because God will come to deliver God's people. And then in verse 8 it says, for I the Lord, this is Isaiah speaking for God, Yahweh, presumably is spoken to Isaiah, and now he speaks to the people. For I the Lord love justice. Justice is to be fair to all people. Then it says, I hate robbery and wrongdoing. I will faithfully give them their recompense. And presumably that is those who rob and do wrong. He will fix them. I will make an everlasting covenant with them. And in this case, he's talking about the people of God, that he will be an everlasting covenantal God to them. Their descendants shall be known among the nations, and their offspring among the peoples. All who see them shall acknowledge that they are people whom the Lord has blessed. In other words, when people look at the folks from Judah, they see that God is on their side, as Bob Dylan will sing 20 centuries later. And it also means that this patina that they have of God's protection and security will also help them from their enemies round about them. Now Isaiah speaks, I will greatly rejoice in the Lord. My whole being shall exalt my God, for he has clothed me with garments of salvation. He has covered me with the robe of righteousness. As a bridegroom decks himself with garland, as a bride adorns herself with jewels. For the earth brings forth its shoots, and the garden causes what is sown in it to spring up. So the Lord God will cause righteousness and praise to spring up before all the nations. That term, all the nations, means perhaps all the Gentiles. So anyone outside of Judah looking at Judah in Palestine will notice that God's protection is with these people, and they have re-rooted themselves in Jerusalem after it was more or less destroyed and they were dragged into exile. Now that they're back from exile, God has planted them something like a garden or a field. The earth will bring forth its shoots, and a garden causes what is sown in it to spring up. Notice that garden talks about a new creation, just like the Garden of Eden in the book of Genesis. Now I'd ask you to flip back from Isaiah 61 to Psalm number 126. It's not necessarily a long psalm, it's only 6 verses, but I would suggest that we would take a look at it and see what it has to say. It talks, and this pairs it up with the last part of the Isaiah 61 text when it talks about harvesting joy. It says, when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, and basically what Zion means is those who were brought back and those who returned to Zion or perhaps Jerusalem. We were like those who dream. And sometimes our dreams are scary, sometimes our dreams are hopeful. And in this particular dream about being restored to Zion, this would be a hopeful dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then it was said among the nations, or among the Gentiles, as I said a moment ago, the Lord has done great things for them. That is, God has acted on behalf of these people from Judah. The Lord has done great things for us. This is the voice of the people now responding in this song of ascents, in this harvest of joy song. The Lord has done great things for us, and we rejoiced. There is nothing more satisfying in worship to see a bunch of happy people thanking God for the blessings that God has given them. Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like the water courses in the Negeb. The Negeb was a desert, a wilderness area, desert, and one can only imagine water courses in a desert. That is just counterintuitive in every possible way. Desert usually means lack of water. Here they're talking about restoring their fortunes like the water courses in the Negeb, which is water courses in the midst of the desert. May those who sow in tears reap with shouts of joy. And so people, because of God's blessing upon them, they start weeping, mourning, lamenting their particular circumstance or situation, and then suddenly they, after they've sown in tears, they begin to reap with shouts of joy. Those who go out weeping, bearing their seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, carrying their sheaves. And so the answer to the misery and the despair and the despondency of Judah now comes to fulfillment because of God's intervention on their behalf in front of the nations, in front of the Gentiles, to make them shout with joy. And remember, their mouths are filled with laughter. I'd like to thank you for being with me today, and I look forward to seeing you at the end of the week, in which we will talk about 1 Thessalonians, and we'll also talk about the beginning of the Gospel of John. So thank you very much.